Well, good afternoon, everybody, or morning, depending on where you are. I guess afternoon for most places. My name is Mel Ochoa. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Landmark Ventures. And as you know, Landmark Ventures hosts the Social Innovation Summit each year in June, which we will be doing. We also have upcoming webinars that you can join as well, much like this one, that you can learn more about at socinnovation.com. I want to welcome everybody today. This is an extremely interesting topic right now and something that I'm personally excited about. I know we have a lot of educators and companies and nonprofits joining us today that are working hard on the front lines and across education. So definitely want to say that we appreciate everything everyone is doing in these times. And more than anything, we hope everyone is staying safe and healthy, and your families are as well. So thank you for joining us, and I know it'll be a fruitful and helpful conversation. As we progress through the hour, make sure to post your questions in the Q&A function, and our team is going to be reading through those and making sure that we can ask as many as possible. Let me start off by saying that the genesis of this conversation was really 3 or 4 weeks ago, when it seemed like in 1 week, school districts and universities and a lot of other education providers were shutting down left and right. And it just was a big tidal wave of the reshaping of education in the matter of days. And really a huge reliance on distance learning that we've never seen before in this country. And a lot of teacher friends of mine were adjusting quickly. And on top of that, a lot of parents who I know with kids, they were becoming schedulers and lesson planners immediately in terms of what the shape of the day looks like and the shape of the week looks like, in conjunction with a lot of hardworking teachers and educators out there. So I want to recognize them as well for all of this. And it just seemed like there was a huge reliance on edtech, as I said before, in this country collectively. And I thought it would be really interesting to hear about the pivot and what we can glean in terms of early lessons learned, and how companies and people and organizations have really approached their work, and also what it means for the future of education. And so I thought, well, let's pull together some voices and just check in about a month into everything closing on, at least on the education front within schools and districts, et cetera, and universities, and see what's happening and what this means or what people are doing, just to see some early lessons learned. And I also wanted to think about a few different angles. So bringing together 4 different voices within education, but still under the education umbrella. And so that's where our amazing, phenomenal featured speakers come into play here. We wanted to bring in a tech platform provider and the math angle as well, specifically. So we have Shalinee from Zearn joining us, and then a higher education perspective. So we have Dr. Daniel Greenstein, Chancellor, joining us. And then we thought, well, we want to make sure that we have that arts perspective and thinking about music and staying active in other ways. And so we have Henry joining us. And then we wanted to bring in a larger corporate perspective, especially around reading. And so we have Michael joining us as well. So here we all are. Thank you, everybody, for making the time. We know you're busy, and so really appreciate it. Also want to thank New Profit for their partnership, and again, thank the featured speakers. Reminder to all attendees online right now, you received a digital brochure with everyone's bio, all the speaker bios, so please read through those. And then again, please post questions to the Q&A function for the speakers, and we will start asking those very soon. So let me kick things off. Really want to get this moving. I think it would be nice to hear from each featured speaker. If you could just go in for 2 minutes, if you will, just what the pivot has meant for your work and how you've responded around this need for distance learning. So Shalinee, would you mind kicking things off?
Sure. Thanks, Mel, and thank you for gathering us today. So Zearn is a nonprofit, and our mission is to support all kids to love learning math. Right now, we have a K-5 math curriculum, and what makes it special is it includes 400 hours of digital learning, that is free for families. Before March 16th, because I think for us, everything is before March 16th and after March 16th.
Mm.
So before March 16th, we served about half the schools in the country. Post March 16th, we're north of 60% of schools, and that's increasing every day.
Wow.
And, you know, the orientation of the content we've created has always been for teachers and by teachers, and intended to be used in schools. And the reason is, in this country, you have to go to school. And that is one of the great parts of our country. And so when you're inside of a school, that is where you can access all kids, irrespective of background or family income. That's where all of our children are. They are in schools. Not right now. And so what we had gotten wind by Thursday or Friday, so like roughly speaking about March 11th or March 12th, we started to hear from a few state agencies that we partner with that there was a really very real possibility that on Monday, March 16th, schools were going to close for an extended period of time. We weren't given, you know, a timeline. Like all of us as parents, we don't actually know what's going to happen either for the rest of the year or this fall. But we did start to hear from major states that school would be closing on Monday. And it did dawn on us at that point that there would be a lot of users coming our way. And so, and you know, we were both grateful and humbled for the chance to serve so many families and kids, but also candidly frightened for what was going to come our way and how we could properly prepare for it. So what we did was on that Thursday, the teams, their normal work, people essentially dropped what was on their to-do list. And Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we prepared with our distance learning approach. And that included everything from the fundamentals of seeing how many signups were going to hit us. Monday, the 16th, we had a 30 times increase in signups. So we did anticipate growth, but not like that. And since then, it's been in the 10x range. And today, or last week, there are more lessons completed on our site than any time in history. And so as we got oriented, we were thinking a lot about equity and how do we support all schools and districts and all families. And I can share more about that as we keep going. But yeah, that's what the pivot's been about. It's been about just helping as many families as we can. Yeah,
that's a huge increase in volume, and so I'm sure the pivot has mainly been around just how to tackle everything and continue to grow.
Yeah, and survive, and you know, I think it's a lot of laughter. I think if you have double the work, you feel stressed. If you have 30 times, it's funny. Like the whole thing is just, you know, we'll try our best. Yeah.
Right. You just day by day, minute by minute.
Day by day.
Chancellor Greenstein, do you want to step in to explain how your pivot has looked? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you oversee 24, 26 campuses. So that's quite a scale to be thinking about some of the things and just the speed you're working at right now.
Yeah, no, it's been quite an incredible few weeks. It's there are 14 of us. Thank goodness the number is that compressed. 14 universities, about 96,000 students overall. March 13th was also the critical day for us. I think we announced that our universities would move the following Monday to remote instruction, in line with the governor's initiative with respect of K-12 education. There had been some planning a couple of days at a time. We've been thinking about the possibility of that. And it was just, you know, it really a tremendous effort. Of those 96,000 students, the vast majority are you know, in the traditional on-ground programs. We do obviously quite a number of fully online programs, but you know, most of our students are face-to-face or in some kind of hybrid modality. So that switch was pretty significant. It really required faculty and staff to step up in all sorts of new ways. I mean, learning whole new modalities about delivery. You know, some doing it very quickly, some were already in term, their spring break was about to happen and they extended their spring break. So we bought time in a way to prepare, usually by using the spring breaks a little bit differently. And it was phenomenal. I mean, it's not something I don't think anybody wants to do again if we can if we can avoid it. But you just heard stories about heroic efforts being made all over the place. I don't want to, obviously what happened in the classroom with education was obviously so important, but I also don't want to overlook just the tremendous effort that was required to think about all sorts of things. I mean, what to do about students who were who had no place to go. Are they able to stay on campus and as counties across the state? Now, of course, all of them are under stay-at-home. As counties across the state began to sort of be put under stay-at-home restrictions, what to do about students who didn't have anywhere to go? What were the what was the impact on essential personnel who needed to support their sort of sustain their lives and safety, sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Who feeds the rats in the lab? I mean, from the sublime to the ridiculous. What to do about students who went home to areas of the state where there's no broadband network coverage to speak of, and how do they gain access to remote? And of course, resulting in a significant acquisition of laptops and hotspots so that those students could at least have some access to. So just the wealth of procedural and policy level detail that we had to sort of work through in real time in order to create an operating environment, had to shift an operating environment which was geared in every single way to remote, to face-to-face instruction, so that it can manage almost wholly remote forms of instruction. It's tremendous. I'm glad we're through it. Looking forward to the future. Yeah, really quite a journey.
Yeah, great, thank you. Henry, so taking a different perspective in terms of all the work that you were doing around music education beforehand, and now I'm sure people are looking for more of those activities. What has the pivot been like for you?
Sure, and just quickly on Save the Music, we work with hundreds of school districts and thousands of Title I schools nationwide. And our mission is every kid should be making music as part of their school day. A quality education includes music education. And to echo Shalinee's point, our focus before 90% of our focus is really on in-school, again, because that's where the students are. That's where, and our schools are mostly Title I schools. And so that's where we're focused on equity and access via the in-school during the school day experience. And so it, for most people, was a very dramatic change. And so for the first couple of weeks, we really focused on two things. One is communicating daily and weekly with our school districts, with their teachers, principals, school administrators, most of whom are operating in large or mid-sized city school districts. And then on the other side of the ledger, working with all of our music partners and technology partners and content partners to push out as many free and low barrier and remote learning resources as we could find across the music sector to help students, parents, teachers sort of navigate the new sort of remote learning challenge they're facing. So similar to what Zearn is seeing on the math side, people like Fender Play, which is online guitar lessons, or Soundtrap for Education, which is an online digital audio workstation. Those services have seen, those free services have seen, I know tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of new signups, because people are very hungry for, solutions to how do you learn and teach these things online. I think in the last 3 weeks, we've added 50 new partnerships to our sort of set of resources for teachers. And I know, Mel, we're gonna talk about equity and access a little bit. In the communications with teachers, we're now starting to sort of see the landscape of everything that people are facing in these large public school districts as they're simultaneously trying to feed students and deliver remote learning and figure out how to teach online to student populations, a lot of whom are not, to Chancellor Greenstein's point, there's a lot of students out there that don't have, what we're envisioning as parents, a device, connectivity, a quiet place to study and remote learn. So we're just seeing now sort of the combination of all those challenges bubbling up, and teachers, principals, administrators really jumping in, and I think somebody said heroic, like in a heroic way to try to sort this all out.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort it out quickly. Michael, I want to move over to you on the reading front, on the scholastic front, but also I think you mentioned that there's just millions of more readers coming online now, and how has that affected your pivot, if you will?
Yes, thanks, Mel. Thanks for Landmark Ventures for pulling this together as well. I'm learning a lot just listening to our other panelists, and so I'm very thankful for that. As most know, Scholastic has been around for a long time. So it'll be 100 years in October. And so with that, they've faced many different challenges throughout the century of learning and supporting teachers. And with that, much like what Zearn talked about, we had to pivot quickly around about the same time. We may have had a couple more days ahead because we had anticipated some of this happening, and putting together some virtual learning to support teachers for that learning platform from classroom to students, as well as those families who didn't have access or teachers didn't have that access to them. So quickly we had to develop lessons for at home around not just literacy, but math, science, social studies, geography from pre-K to 12. And from our past experiences, we've learned that we have to make sure we include how to support the families and what that looks like. So making sure we had family resources for them, activities for them to do with their child, what to look for during these readings. So we developed, to date, we have 20 lessons online, free resources for our families, as well as we offer other resources, digital resources and gamification for students to do free, from science to book flicks to reading, to authors sharing how to do read alouds, to authors also giving other tips, from Dave Pilkey from Captain Underpants, supporting families and teachers on what to do. And so far we've had over 40 million viewers to the page, 40 million to date. And we have 21 million visitors to the site that I just described to you. So wow. I imagine folk are using this source all over the country in ways that none of us could have imagined. We would have never imagined 1 million viewers a day, every 12 hours. Who would have thought about that? And so it was a huge pivot, a quick pivot. And I know others have said, we're going to talk about the equity and all of that in a minute. So we'll get to that as well. Bless you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's get to that. I think this is probably top of mind for everyone, and I really appreciate that it's top of mind for all of you as educators. You know, there's a lot of challenges that I don't want to downplay. I think there are a lot of educators thinking about how to feed students, thinking about safety and health concerns. And so, you know, us focusing on edtech today doesn't mean that any other challenge or critical issue out there is any less important. So I want to, you know, show appreciation for all of those educators working on those issues as well. I think in edtech, one of the bigger issues of many is just equity and inclusion, and making sure that there's not a slide in terms of learning or progress, but also just access, right? And making sure that things even outside of broadband are thought of as we think about this new world of distance learning. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. I want to keep it a little open-ended because I think each of you are approaching the equity question or the equity gap in different ways. And so I don't want to define it for you. So I would love to hear your thoughts in terms of how you're approaching equity and inclusion. So we'd love to go around the table again. Shalinee, if you want to start off from your perspective.
Sure. So, you know, we serve, serving more than half the schools in the country now. We serve all schools, but we do over-index in Title I schools. So we serve, you know, many, many students in poverty. And I think, you know, you can't, you know, in a week or two pivot your entire program to support all kids. And so there have to be structures in place that are already, that already promote equity and access, which I think it's hard to fathom anybody working in K-12 who's not already doing that work. So I would, you know, anticipate everybody's organization around the table is leaning on the structures that are already in place and trying to amplify those structures. So, that can be from anywhere from representation. So when we are teaching, who are the children, what are the faces, what are the stories, like who are the children that we are showing as successful or as learners or scholars, and what do those children look like? We can't pivot that, over in a month. That has to be there already. But, and so you have to, lean on those structures that are in place. But that being said, the biggest pivot, I would say, for Zearn from an equity and access perspective, which we're continuing to work on and continuing to push, is how we're supporting parents directly. So, in our 8-year history, schools have been our intermediary. So we support all families, but we have schools and teachers, and we've built a program and supports around that program to support teachers. Now we have parents, caregivers, grandparents emailing us directly. And, there's tens of thousands of emails from parents asking new questions that we've never seen before. And so it's, just thinking about, and I'm a working mom with 2 children and no childcare. And so they're watching a movie right now. And so when something comes home from school, am I playing the role of teacher, or am I playing the role of do what your teacher said, right? Like how tight can these instructions be? How clear can they be? And so I think what's tricky for organizations that have worked with teachers is that when we're working with teachers, we are saying, well, you might want to consider this, you might want to do this, here's some options, you know more than we do about your students. Once we're working with parents are like, what do I do? Press, like, tell me the button to press. They just want extremely tight and clear instructions. And when you talk about the levels of supports, there's devices, there's broadband, there's language barriers, there's so many levels of supports that are new for us. But sitting here looking at most schools to be closed for the rest of the year, many schools to likely have interruptions through next year, we have no choice but to build these supports into our organization ASAP. And so that's what we're working on.
Yeah, it seems foundational going forward, not just a Band-Aid for the next few months. Chancellor, your thoughts on equity and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I think your word Band-Aid is a perfect description. In my experience over the last few weeks, we basically, you identify a problem, you solve it, right? You have students who have nowhere to go, you figure out a way to house them in your dorms. You have students who rely on their work-study roles in order that they can basically sustain themselves, so you pay them even though they're not working. You have students who need mental health and wellness supports, even though they're out of state, and you figure out ways around the licensing restrictions so you can get them that support. You have students who have accessibility issues, which aren't addressed when you race everything into remote instruction, and you deal with them on a one-off basis, and it just goes on. You have students who have no broadband access in your community, so you open up your internet, your internet, university internet sites into parking lots so that members of the community can come and bring their kids who have, high school or school kids. So you solve these problems in a non-sustaining way. You have students who really need refunds for the room and board they're not going to use, and you pay them back those refunds. None of these things are sustainable. And in some ways, I think it does sort of testify to the mission-oriented nature of what we all do. Because no one would take very many of these steps if they were thinking about, sustaining their operations in a viable way over the longer period. But we do this because, we are here because we're mission driven. We are here for our students, not just some of our students, but for all of our students. As we go forward into sort of rebuilding our future, we're going to have to think about how to do all of these things in a sustaining way. And so, the enormous amount of energy that went into this transition, which was a short, compressed period of time, we're now going to spend 10x that in thinking about another kind of transition, which will set us up for these potentially continuing episodes in the future.
Yeah, well said. And the work is not done. Let's go over to Michael and then Henry, because I know Henry has a few examples as well. But Michael, how have you thought of equity and inclusion and some of the online resources?
This is normally the time, Mel, that Scholastic is in schools. Everybody knows the book fairs and working with families through the book clubs. And that's a huge amount of time that is spent in schools, and that's not happening now, and not giving families access to books. But also Scholastic Education side works with primarily title schools as well. And so what does it look like to support all families, which we always talk about the whole child. And so for us, the pivot there wasn't, we had a plan very quickly because it was the work we were already doing. And so we received a call, a very important call from the State Commissioner of Education, Miguel Cardona in Connecticut, and from the governor's office, saying, listen, we love you as a partner, Scholastic, we've been doing all this time, but we realized, and we knew this, but it's hitting us even more so, that all of our families don't have access to technology, or many families may only have one device, or family members are using one phone, or all the other challenges that some families may have. And we wanted to make sure that all children receive access. And so we supported them coming up with a plan on how to reach all children, starting with digital as a first pathway. And then a blended approach. Some families may have devices and staggering the time they use it, and then giving them print as well. And then a third pathway of just print only. How do we work with those districts and families where they're picking up grab-and-go lunches and meals, or where they're using bus routes to drop off lunches, how we can work with alongside with them while being safe, to making sure that all families receive that. And we heard this, someone else said this, where families need to have directions on what that looks like. How do I work with my kindergartner? Even teachers need to have support on what that looks like. And so making sure that whatever we do send out and supporting our families, that we give support all around on how to help. When you look at the city of New York alone, there are over 120,000 families in transition and temporary housing who have to be considered in how we support them as well. And I look at technology as an avenue that we come together to discuss what it is, how we support them, and then we move from there to get them what they need and access to that. So technology still plays a part in it for those of us that come together to come up with the plans and solutions to support, and then we support those families that are in need.
Oh, thank you. Henry.
I'm unmuted. Thanks. I'll echo what everybody said. I mean, I think our estimate is that roughly 50% of our students don't have reliable technology or connectivity at home. And in our world, even more kids have their instrument at home to practice and play music. You know, we're seeing school districts, LAUSD, I saw the other day, reported that roughly a third of their students, and I think they have 600,000 students in that district, roughly a third hadn't logged on for the online school. And like Michael, we're seeing more schools doing paper packet distribution along with the meals and sort of other places for interacting with families. And also then from our pre-K through 6 teachers, this idea that you're really creating family activities and parent activities that, as opposed to student activities. But I mean, I think on the technology side for us, a couple big takeaways are, one is somebody on our K through 6 teacher call last night, everybody is the same because they're all facing the same challenges, but also everybody is different. And so what I took that to mean is we're seeing a tremendous period of experimentation and innovation and people trying tools, ways to get technology, dropping off Chromebooks at students' houses and instruments at students' houses. You're seeing a really aggressive period of experimentation and innovation. To the Chancellor's point about, there are problems in front of teachers and administrators, and they're working to solve those problems. So what that looks like in our Title I world is most of the solutions, the edtech solutions that are working for people, are very broad-based, low-barrier solutions. And so that's almost always some combination of a free resource, an easy-to-use technology, so you're not asking the student or the teacher or the parent to learn a piece of software at the same time as they're learning the subject that that you're trying to teach, and platforms and behaviors that students and families already know how to do. So I'll just give you a few examples. So we work with Soundtrap, which is a service that Spotify runs, and Soundtrap for Education works in the cloud. It works on your phone. You're able to record things using your phone, creating tracks, creating songs, sharing that with your colleagues, your fellow students, your teacher. Similarly, Chromebook, Chrome Lab, which works on the Chromebook, or GarageBand, which works on your tablet. These are all technologies, particularly the phone, that we know or have a high degree of confidence that students have. And if you can make the phone the way that they're receiving that learning, and also in a lot of ways you make the phone the instrument, you can record on your phone, you can play keyboard on your phone. Those are the kind of things that we're seeing working.
Very smart. There. I do want to move into questions from attendees. So thank you all who are online. I will go through them. I will try to get names correct. But your last point, Henry, moves us really, transitions us well. One person asked, Karen asked, if any of you are thinking about microcontent on mobile, since mobile is so, such a powerful tool now. It's in everyone's hands, probably more than a laptop. Kids nowadays don't even have a laptop sometimes. So we'd love to hear either microcontent or anything you're doing around edtech and thinking about just that delivery method, if you will, or other things that you have learned either through this in terms of delivery methods. Shalinee, again, do you want to think about that?
Sure. So Zearn Math has a responsive design, so it's going to work essentially when there's a browser. There's no need, one doesn't need to therefore be on a phone and do what might be, I don't know what microcontent means, but I'm going to assume it means something shorter or more bite size. And that's not the ideal for a temporary period of time. That's fine. But, actually learning is incredibly complex and fragile and nuanced. And so it's, the content shouldn't, in my opinion, once it's on a phone, be shorter or less rigorous. Like, children need to be doing mathematics in its full depth. But what I would say that's an interesting consideration that we have to think about is when we were in schools, we had to think about supporting the kind of dusty old desktop in the back that one child is working on. If you can think of if you've been in a K-5 school, you may remember what I'm thinking of, or that image may harken for you. And now we have low-cost Android devices that we have to navigate. So it does change sort of engineering prioritization, but I don't think once we change device size, we should change the content. It should all be excellent and rigorous.
Dr. Greenstein?
I'll say this with a great deal of love and affection for what's just happened. My experience of it at our universities, and my daughter is at home from school, and so she's involved in her remote learning from college. It's very low tech. Obviously those faculty and courses and programs that were fully online, we're using much more innovative technology. But imagine, one on a Friday afternoon at about 5 o'clock, you get this message from your chancellor, say we're going remote, and within several days you're going remote. You're not thinking about, getting out onto the frontier of technology. It's a lot of, it's Zoom-based conversations. You put your PowerPoints up online. Some faculty who recognize that their students may or may not have access to the bandwidth necessary to do Zoom might be doing more of a correspondence-based thing, really over email. You use your learning management system. Thank goodness there was some general pervasive penetration to the best of your ability with the supports that you have. And again, it goes back to that, earlier point I made. You solve the problem which is immediately in front of you while thinking, over the longer term about what this means for how we support our faculty, how we support our students, how we encourage different and more intensive uses of existing technologies, not only in order to support what will likely be some growing preference for online learning, but potentially for the need to pivot again should pandemic recur. Swiftly again within the middle of a term. So no one wants to go through what we just did quite in the same way, and there's ways to prepare for the second time through. It's my hope.
Yeah, Michael, want to turn things over to you. I think microcontent is one aspect, but even after that, someone posted a question asking about longer forms, like how do you get books in hands? You mentioned a couple things, but there's still a need for longer form content. How have you thought about content in general, as specifically on mobile?
So we're fortunate. I don't know exactly what's meant by micro content, but we're fortunate to have through mobile devices full content. So we already have that availability, as well as books, full books that you can access through your phone or your device. So fortunately, we already have that, and that was in place before this happened. Did we have to pivot a little bit with that? Maybe on some of the other programs that we introduced, but it wasn't difficult to do because we already had resources that you can use through your phone, full content.
Great. Henry, I know you mentioned a couple thoughts already on this. I want to move on to the next question that I will make sure to bring you in on, but getting a lot of questions too around just the student experience and interaction. And Shalinee, I think, mentioned this earlier as well, but that's a huge part of education and the learning process. How have each of you thought about that when it comes to technology in terms of, I guess, in your own worlds, one, connecting teacher to student or student to student, but also even at the university level or higher ed level? Someone mentioned in a question that you can have a Zoom class with 200 students. How are you folding in interaction beyond that? Or is that going to be just the way things are, and it's just going to be looking at a screen with a professor at a whiteboard, if you will? So in your own worlds, what does that student experience / interaction look like, or how are you thinking about it from an education technology standpoint? Shalinee?
So I think if you step back from education technology and you just go to the fundamental research of how children learn, one of the things that we know about ourselves as adults, but certainly is true about children, is that when we synthesize or pull a full idea together and make sense of it, we are often verbalizing it. Yes, there are some perhaps super introverted children, perhaps myself, who just sat quietly and verbalized it. But by and large, you're talking to your peers and you're talking to your teacher. And it's in that moment that we're synthesizing and actually understanding. It could be mathematics, it could be, critical reading, whatever activity you're engaged in. And there's gonna be no ed tech substitute for that. And so trying to pretend that there is one is, just a waste of effort on everybody's part. And so when we think about teaching children, particularly, I would say K-8, because brain development starts to shift as children get older, and especially K2, K5, we just have to know that and remember that. And so that's why we have schools. And so, yes, we're in crisis right now, but as we transition to systems and routines where we're supporting all kids in this world of, let's say, folks are calling it rolling blackouts through next year, we do need to remember that, okay, fine, yes, there's wonderful digital resources that 10 years ago there were not, and there's some bad stuff out there, but there's amazing amounts of good stuff out there. But ultimately, children need to talk to peers and talk to teachers and synthesize, and there's no way around that. Learning is fundamentally social.
Yeah. Henry, want to bring you into the conversation. Look, I learned clarinet as a kid when I was in school. Was not good. I'm not in an orchestra now. I work at Landmark Ventures, so there's a reason for that. But it seems to me that part of the process was being in a band room, an orchestra room with the flute and others around me. How are you seeing music education changing right now with the need for technology?
Oh, for sure. Well, just a couple things. One is I was on a call yesterday and people said a lot more practice at home was happening. So it's just an upside. Parents are making their children practice while they're at home with them. But I think yeah, Shalinee is exactly right. I mean, from a broader perspective, our goal as educators is not necessarily to create good musicians. It's to create capable people and good citizens who can navigate, you know, their way through the world. And so when you talk about what you get out of that ensemble, yes, learning to play the piece together effectively, but it's also working with others, listening to your peers. There's that whole host of social and emotional learning benefits that really come along with expressing yourself through music and playing in the ensemble that people need to be together to do, and there's really no substitute for that. And I hope that this fall, when students are returning to school and they've just been through what's been a very traumatic and weird last 6 months, that, you know, there's hopefully a renewed focus on the social and emotional parts of it that help people process that experience and express themselves. But on the music tech side, you know, we were already leaning much more into music technology. If you look at somebody like Billie Eilish and her brother who won all those Grammys, they made that album, you know, in their house on their iPad. And so the way that music and popular music is going, we were already leaning much more into beat making and electronic music production and DJing and digital audio workstations. And so this, I think, is really going to accelerate both interest in that and from the student in sort of demand side. And then also we're seeing with teachers that they're getting a crash course right now in how to create ensembles, make music online, make music using a MIDI keyboard and an iPad. And we were already pushing that direction because there's been a lot of focus on that, especially at the high school level in terms of career pathways and career education. But my hope, in addition to the social and emotional learning piece, is that this really accelerates the adoption at the school level of a lot of this electronic music making and production and all those things. And we're definitely seeing that. We're seeing, you know, New Orleans brass band teachers whose bands travel the world. You know, they go to Paris, they go to Japan because they're New Orleans, you know, high school marching bands. And we're on Zoom calls with that teacher, you know, every week talking about how to learn electronic music production.
That's great. I want to move over to the Chancellor. I think this was a question from Hanny. Hopefully I don't butcher that, but you know, thinking of a large classroom, I remember when I was at UC Berkeley, I think my freshman classes were 1,000 people. And so how have you thought about that transition into, or how that affects the student experience?
Yeah, so
and relationship with the professor or TAs.
Yeah. So again, I mean, you know, you're seeing that engagement being tackled on an individual one-off basis. You know, faculty, you know, really raising their game to do what they can to reach their students and to ensure that they're engaged. I mean, whether in small groups, seminar type groups where you break up the class, you use TAs and in the best way that you can. So I think that's, you know, again, on a best efforts basis. There's some other things which are harder to grapple with. I just throw them out there. You know, one of them is experiential learning. Student teaching is an obvious example. Internships, you know, you can't do an internship unless you're in an essential occupation in a state which is under a stay-at-home regulation. So what do you do for the purposes of licensure? And I think there's one other component that I see through my daughter's experience, you know, and it gets directly at engagement. There's a mental health and wellness aspect of students who are, you know, in a face-to-face environment and they're pulled out of that environment. And there's the sense of frustration that they feel and the disengagement from the work that doesn't result from the faculty may be doing a great job and are doing a great job but the fact that they're no longer surrounded by their peers, that the structures that they had, that they were used to working in, having to shift that rapidly in order to sustain themselves and their work and their grade point average and all the rest of it is incredibly frustrating. And so, I want to do a lot to honor the faculty who are going out of their way and raising their game in all sorts of ways that no one anticipated, but also the students who are trying in profoundly challenging ways to maintain a level of engagement that they need to maintain in order to continue to progress through their degree program.
Yep. Michael, I will leave this question with you to wrap us up here on this question, at least the interactive component of and what you've learned or how you've thought about technology in a new way in terms of making sure that that experience is there just as much as the content delivery. Sorry, Michael, I think you're still on mute. There you go.
All righty. When I think of we as a have a Zoom call going. Am I still on mute?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, we have the Zoom call going and it's great, but we still need physical contact. We still need to be in front of someone. We still need to have, Shalinee really described it well. Students at the younger grades, it's critical when you talk about bringing them together in small groups and the teacher focusing on where they are as the reader, where they are in their math learning, and really honing in on their skills. If we had all students and 100% of every student is on the exact same level, that's a little different, but that's not our case. Our children are on various levels and need various different supports. And they also learn from each other very well. So what I'm finding is we're recommending when we're doing, say we're doing a Zoom classroom, you may not have to do it with all the students at once. You can do it where certain students talk, where they have a chance to talk, and then another group has a chance to talk, so they're interacting, and everyone has a chance to say something or get in or hear from others, instead of just a teacher, unfortunately, and having to do direct delivery and the students receive it and then go do the work. So for now, this is where we are, but we're going to have to get back to re-engaging them in that education process where, and continuing what we're doing because we don't know what's going to happen in these waves, but understanding it is truly important that students have interaction with each other and the teacher in those smaller settings, one-on-ones, and the whole class as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Continuing on our questions, and I know we have about 10 minutes to wrap things up, I want to move to something that a lot of people are asking about in terms of what's next and the future and the new normal, I guess, is the buzzword now. Scott Galloway, a professor at NYU Stern, recently sent an article and he said that he said things won't change as much as this will accelerate things. While other crises reshape the future, COVID-19 is just making the future happen faster. And so a lot of people are thinking about accelerating things rather than the change that we're looking at. So I would love to hear your future predictions. I know you can't really predict things right now, so I apologize for using that word, but I guess what this means for your work going forward, how you think things will change a little bit here and there, and maybe education broadly. So Shalinee, would love to start with you again.
Sure. So I will start by saying, while I do think things will change, and I think that the notion that it's going to accelerate the future is, that's a really great frame. I just want to say, I want to start by saying that, so, many of us are parents, we send our kids into a building. The number one thing we expect at the end of the day, if we go back and pick up our kids from the building, or if a caregiver does, is that they come back home safe. And so these are, K-12, K-5, K-8, these are children. And so our number one objective when we drop our children off at school is safety. The next objective is that they thrive, they learn, right? So they grow and they feel safe and they feel loved. So these are not environments where rapid change is a good idea. Because again, while, as sitting in the world of business or sitting in the world of adults, rapid change is interesting, but sitting in the world of children, my children will barely transition from one activity to the next. Like, we don't need rapid change for small children. Now, that being said, what I do think that this sort of the rolling blackouts that we can anticipate will change is digital access. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal recently, and he said, we're finally now going to become a digital society. Like we were, en route to transitioning to one, but between devices, broadband, and then just digital tools being, be it software, being as sophisticated as they could be, that this is going to rapidly accelerate that. And that will happen in K-12. And, I think everyone knows that K-12 has been a little bit reluctant in that transition. And so that's either going to be a great thing if that's great content coming into kids, or it's going to be whatever, because the content is also just kind of whatever. So TBD on which content gets delivered to children. I think the conversations that I'm hoping that we start sparking in the world of K-12, which I have yet to participate in, because most of the conversations are just, how do we roll out distance learning? How do we deal with this crisis? But next year, in the 2020-21 academic year, we can anticipate that schools will be closed for a portion of time. And so how are we going to support making up that time for students? So right now, could we start planning as a country for not this summer, but for next summer, for school to be open for a month, and making sure that systems are put in place where that's a reasonable solution, right? So all the parties at the table all the stakeholders at the table are able to negotiate and figure out what it takes to open school for a month. Because ultimately, there's no distance learning solution that's going to be actually equitable and is actually going to support all kids, K-8, that our country can spin up in a matter of weeks. It's just not possible. And so that's sort of big thoughts on my mind of, in the next 18 months, can we get some school going during safe times in the year?
Yep. Thank you. Very, very smart thoughts. Michael, would love to hand it over to you. Just some top line thoughts on what you're thinking about for the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months.
So we learned some very valuable lessons when after Katrina. We were trying our best to put in place, where could we open up, because most of the schools unfortunately were damaged during the storm. After the storm, and getting everyone back and what that would look like. And we were excited. I remember opening up schools in April of 2006 and preparing for that. And we were putting in place what we wanted to for all the kids coming back. And a valuable lesson that we learned was, what do we put in place for the adults? And so not just the family members, but the teachers and the administrators, even the social workers, because they went through a transition as well. And what does that look like? And supporting everyone and what we're calling what will be the new normal. And so that has to go into consideration. We had a great talk with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education today in Missouri, and preparing. They're thinking about this. This was my advice to them. The same thing to New York City public schools, to Connecticut, to Savannah, Georgia, is how do we get ready for those kids been out for 6 months? That's just probably our reality. And what does that look like coming back? And so we need to also be careful of wanting to say, this is where a child should be if we hadn't had this pandemic, and this is where we want them to be. Because we just may not be ready for that. We may have to look at, unfortunately, others are finding out all the inequities that existed as if they weren't there before, but the opportunity gaps are even wider. So we're gonna have to really take it step by step in a faster way than we normally would, but making sure we're supporting all parties, the educators, the families, the students, most importantly, and what that looks like moving forward. But understanding that this could be something that can come back in a different way. And so what we're putting in place, what we've learned from what we just did over these last few months, and virtual learning and using digital to support, what we've learned when one doesn't have it, what we've learned with when you use print only, and then moving forward and how we're getting students to where they need to be, and preparing for something if we had to close schools again. So it's a lot of work. It's going to take many of us sitting down, and again, this panel that you brought together today is so informative for me personally, and for me to take back in the work that we're doing.
That's great.
very happy to take back to Scholastic what I'm learning from the other panelists and the questions that are being asked. It put thought into it as well. So there is no answer to look into the future and say, here's what we're going to do. There is, but we're going to have to be ready for forks in the road to be able to when it comes.
Thank you, Michael. Henry and Dan would love to give you 2 minutes each. Henry, why don't you start things off?
Great, thanks, and thanks again for having me, Mel. I'll also note that Rolling Blackouts is a great band name and the name of a great band from Australia, the Rolling Blackouts. So yeah, just 3 quick things that I think a lot of people have touched on. One is this is a crash course for a lot of teachers in technology and all of the tools that maybe we're used to using more on a daily basis in the corporate world. And now people in the education world are going to be pushed towards, by necessity, learning how to use these things. And I think if there's a silver lining to that, then, you know, we're to see the facility and aptitude of teachers with technology and parents with educational technology, you know, increased access. 2 is, as everybody has pointed out, this has really laid bare a lot of inequity out there. And so I hope when we come back in the fall, and we're betting that schools are going to be back in the fall, that people are really, when they're rolling out technology and to students, teachers, families, they're looking at these broad-based, low barrier, easily accessible, free to use solutions, because we're really seeing the need for that out there, and people are scrambling to put different things together. And then last, I just want to echo the sort of the point that people have made about mental health and wellness and social emotional learning and trauma-informed learning. And I think the post-Katrina example is an apt one, and you know, schools are going to be have to really focus on that, you know, when students come back.
Thank you so much, Henry. Chancellor, I'd love to hear your final thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, just I sort of echo, I think, a lot of what the aftermath of the pandemic will accelerate trends that were already well underway. You know, preference for low residency types of instruction. Quickly to echo what others have said, I do think that the pandemic will accelerate trends that are well underway in growing preference for low residency models, online instruction. I think increasingly we'll see more demand even for short bursts of learning, a short course certificate and credentialing programs, particularly to meet the demand of a much larger population of unemployed folks and also folks who have less financial resources to pay for full degree programs. So I think those things are in our future. I guess I want to end though on this question about equity, because I do not want to underestimate the financial shock that this pandemic is going to cause to all of higher education, public as well as private. And, you know, we were talking before about business models that were not sustainable in a pre-pandemic world. They are certainly not sustainable in a post-pandemic world. And the challenge that I see arising is that the institutions that are most at risk financially, frankly, of failure or significant deterioration are the ones that serve the lion's share of the historically underserved students, the low-income students, students of color, rural students, et cetera. So I think, you know, we used to talk about higher education being a sort of helping to grow inequality. I think there's a real danger that will continue, and potentially accelerate, and that would be damaging to the country, in my view, unless it is addressed.
Well, thank you. Absolutely agree. Thank you to everybody. This is super insightful. I think it was a productive conversation, informative. So thank you, featured speakers, for joining us. And then also all those attendees out there, really appreciate your time and also questions. And we will close things up, and we will see you at our next webinar in a few weeks. So take care, have a great day, and please stay safe and healthy. Bye.